Westfield, New Jersey. Tree-lined streets, colonial homes with wraparound porches, manicured lawns stretching like green carpets under the summer sun. The kind of place where neighbors wave from driveways, where children ride bikes until dusk, where the biggest concern is whether the recycling gets picked up on time. It's the American dream, preserved in amber. Safe, affluent, predictable. But in the summer of 2014, something ancient and patient revealed itself on one quiet street. Something that had been watching, waiting, for decades. This is the story of 657 Boulevard, and the thing that claimed it. June 2014. Derek and Maria Broaddus were living a moment most people only dream of. After years of saving, searching, and hoping, they'd found it. The perfect home. 6 bedrooms, Dutch colonial architecture, over a century old, sitting on one of Westfield's most coveted streets. 657 Boulevard, $1.3 million. Every penny they had. But it was worth it. This wasn't just a house, this was their future. A place to raise their 3 young children, to build memories, to grow old. The previous owners, the Woods family, had lived there for 23 years without incident. It was, by all accounts, a happy home. But the house on Boulevard had a history the Broadduses didn't know. And someone else, someone who had never left, was eager to introduce themselves. 3 days after closing, before the family had even moved in, Derek Broaddus drove to the house to oversee some painting. June 3rd, 2014. A Wednesday. Sunny. Perfect weather for a fresh start. He checked the mailbox. Mostly junk mail, contractors' invoices. And then a letter. Hand-addressed. No return address. The envelope was simple. White. Standard size. His name and the address written in careful, deliberate handwriting. Not typed. Handwritten. Something about that felt immediately wrong. He opened it standing in the driveway. The sun was warm on his shoulders. Birds sang in the trees. Everything felt normal. Until he started reading. The first letter. Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard. Allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. Derek's eyes scanned the opening lines. Polite, almost warm. He felt himself relax slightly. Maybe this was just a quirky neighbor tradition. A strange but harmless welcome. Then came the next line. How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? The tone shifted. Something in the phrasing felt off. Theatrical. Deliberately unsettling. Derek kept reading, his pulse beginning to quicken. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. Derek's hands began to tremble. This wasn't a welcome letter. This was something else entirely. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. His breath caught. The questions felt like threats, like someone probing for weaknesses, testing him. The letter continued, growing more invasive with each line. You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I have counted. Derek's vision blurred. They knew about his children. They'd been watching. Counting. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Young blood. The phrase made his skin crawl. This wasn't metaphorical. This was specific, personal, wrong. Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me. The misspelling of two as two should have been comforting. Proof of human error. But instead it felt more sinister. Like whoever wrote this was so consumed by their obsession, they couldn't even focus on grammar. The letter ended with a promise, a threat disguised as a greeting. Welcome, my friends, welcome. Let the party begin. Signed, The Watcher. Derek stood frozen in the driveway, the letters shaking in his hands. His mind raced through possibilities. A prank had to be a prank. The previous owners getting in one last joke, a bored teenager, a local eccentric. But the detail, the specificity, the fact that they'd counted his children. 3 children. The Watcher had counted 3 children. They'd been watching before the family had even arrived. Derek's first call was to Maria. His voice shook as he read the letter over the phone. She went silent, then asked him to read it again. Slower this time. When he finished, her voice was tight, controlled. Call the Woods. Ask them if this is some kind of joke. Derek called John and Andrea Woods, the previous owners. They'd seemed like nice people. Normal. They'd raised their own children in the house without incident. Did you ever receive anything like this? Derek asked, trying to keep his voice steady. There was a pause on the other end. Too long. Then John Woods cleared his throat. Yes. We got one letter. Just a few days before closing. We thought it was odd, but we figured it was just some neighborhood crank. It wasn't threatening or anything. Derek felt his stomach drop. You didn't think to mention it? It seemed harmless. We'd lived there 23 years without any problems. We honestly didn't think it was a big deal. But it was a big deal. And the Woods had known. They'd received their own letter and said nothing. Derek's next call was to the Westfield Police Department. The investigation begins. Detective Leonard Lugo arrived at 657 Boulevard within an hour. A veteran investigator with the Westfield Police, he'd seen his share of neighborhood disputes, harassment cases, even stalking. But this was different. He read the letter carefully, his expression darkening with each line. Mr. Broaddus, I'm going to be honest with you. This is concerning, very concerning. The references to your children, the watching, the familial claim to the property. This isn't your typical neighborhood welcome. Lugo bagged the letter as evidence. He explained the next steps. Forensic analysis, handwriting examination, interviews with neighbors, surveillance of the property. Have you noticed anyone watching the house? Any vehicles that don't belong? Anyone asking questions about your family? Derek shook his head. They hadn't even moved in yet. They'd been to the house maybe a dozen times since closing. Always during daylight, always briefly. But someone had been there, watching, counting. The detective took detailed notes. When did you close? When did you receive the letter? Who has access to the mailbox? Have you changed the locks? Do you have security cameras? No cameras. Not yet. The locks had been changed during closing, standard procedure. The mailbox was accessible to anyone walking past. Lugo assured Derek that the department would take this seriously. They'd start with the neighbors. Someone on Boulevard knew something. Someone had seen something. In a neighborhood like this, secrets were hard to keep, or so they thought. The second letter. 4 days later, June 7th, 2014. Derek had been checking the mailbox obsessively. Every time he visited the house, his heart pounded as he approached it. Part of him hoped for nothing. Part of him wanted another letter, evidence, something the police could use. He got his wish, another white envelope, same handwriting, same deliberate, careful script. This time, Derek didn't open it alone. He called Detective Lugo immediately. The detective arrived with a forensic tech. They photographed the envelope in place, documented everything before carefully opening it. Derek watched as Lugo read the letter, his jaw tightening. Mr. Broaddus, this one's worse. The detective read it aloud. Mr. and Mrs. Broaddus, I see already that you have flooded 657 Boulevard with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be. Tsk, tsk, tsk. Bad move. You don't want to make me angry, do you? The watcher wasn't just watching the house. They were watching the renovations. They knew contractors were there. They'd been close enough to see them working. You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I have counted. Are you going to be foolish and move your children into the house before it is ready for them? The workers have been busy, and I have been watching. There it was again. Counting the children, watching the workers, the watcher was there. Regularly, observing. I am pleased to know your names now and the names of the young blood you have brought to me. Derek felt his blood run cold. They knew the children's names. How? How could they possibly know the children's names? Had they been following the family, listening to conversations, going through their mail? The letter continued, more invasive than before. Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Maria, reading over Derek's shoulder, made a sound like she'd been punched. The basement. The watcher knew the layout, knew which rooms were isolated, knew where the children would be vulnerable. Will they sleep in the attic? Or will you all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better. This wasn't idle curiosity. This was reconnaissance. The watcher was planning something, studying the house, mapping the family's movements. The letter ended with something that made Derek's hands shake. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the watcher and have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. 2 decades. The watcher claimed they'd been watching the house for 20 years. The entire time the Woods family had lived there. Had the Woods been watched too? Had they known and hidden it? Or had the watcher truly only revealed themselves now, triggered by the new family? The letter's final lines were chilling. The house is crying out to me. Bring me young blood. Welcome again. The watcher. Detective Lugo immediately escalated the investigation. This was no longer a strange letter. This was a credible threat against minors, against a family. The Union County Prosecutor's Office was notified. The FBI was consulted. This had all the hallmarks of a stalking case, potentially escalating to something worse. Forensic analysis began immediately. The paper was standard printer paper, available at any office supply store, no watermarks, no distinguishing features. The envelope was equally generic. Standard white. Self-seal, not lick seal, which meant no DNA from saliva. The handwriting was analyzed by experts. They determined it was likely disguised. Too careful. Too deliberate. Someone was intentionally making their natural handwriting unrecognizable. The postmark showed it had been mailed locally, from Westfield or a neighboring town. But the post office processed thousands of letters daily. No surveillance cameras captured the sender. No fingerprints on the paper or envelope. Whoever sent this had worn gloves or been extremely careful. Detective Lugo began canvassing Boulevard. Door to door. Every house, every resident. Had anyone seen someone lingering near 657 Boulevard? Had anyone noticed unfamiliar vehicles? Did anyone have information about the house's history? Most neighbors were shocked, concerned. This was Westfield. Things like this didn't happen here. But some neighbors were evasive, uncomfortable, and a few seemed almost hostile to the questions. One neighbor, Michael Langford, refused to speak to police without a lawyer. That immediately raised red flags. Why would an innocent neighbor need a lawyer to answer basic questions? Another neighbor, Peggy Rice, an elderly woman who lived across the street, admitted she watched Boulevard constantly, from her window. She knew everyone's comings and goings. She'd lived there for decades. "I watch because I care about this neighborhood," she told Detective Lugo. "We have standards here. Not just anyone belongs on Boulevard." The detective noted her phrasing. Not just anyone belongs. Was that directed at the Broad Deuces? Were they seen as outsiders? Interlopers? The Woods family was interviewed again, more thoroughly this time. They admitted receiving one letter just before closing. They'd thrown it away, hadn't kept it, claimed it seemed harmless. It said something about the house being watched. "But we thought it was just a weird goodbye from a neighbor," Andrea Woods explained. But if it was just a weird goodbye, why hadn't they mentioned it? The investigation expanded. Police checked for similar cases in the area. Had other families received threatening letters? Were there any patterns? Nothing. 657 Boulevard was unique. Background checks were run on every resident of Boulevard. Criminal records, financial problems, mental health red flags, histories of disputes. Several neighbors had minor issues. Parking disputes, noise complaints, but nothing that suggested this level of obsession. The police brought in a forensic linguist to analyze the language in the letters. The expert noted several things. The writer was likely well-educated. The vocabulary was sophisticated. The phrasing theatrical, almost literary. The writer had an obsessive personality. The repetition, the focus on the house's history, the claim of generational watching, all signs of someone with a fixation. The writer likely had narcissistic tendencies. The need to be in control, to be acknowledged, to terrify. Classic narcissistic behavior. But none of this gave them a name. The third letter. The third letter arrived in July. By this point, Derek and Maria had made a decision. They would not move into the house. Not until the watcher was caught. They'd rented a home nearby, smaller, temporary, but safe. Or so they thought. The third letter arrived at 657 Boulevard, but its contents made clear the watcher knew they hadn't moved in. Knew they were afraid. "Where are you?" "I have been waiting for you. 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all of the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone?" The obsession with the basement continued. The watcher wanted the children down there, isolated, vulnerable. I asked the Woods family to bring me young blood, and they failed. Now I have asked you. Do you think you can ignore me? Do you think I will just go away because you are afraid? This was an escalation. The woods had failed. Now the broad deuces were expected to comply. Or what? You are not the only ones watching 657 Boulevard. So am I. And I have ways of knowing when you are there. The watcher was still watching, still monitoring. How close were they? Next door? Across the street? In the woods behind the property? Have a happy moving-in day. You know I will be watching. Always. The Watcher. Maria read the letter and broke down completely. This wasn't going to stop. The Watcher wasn't going away. They were escalating, demanding, threatening. We can't live there, she told Derek through tears. We can never live there. Not with the children. Not with someone watching them, wanting them. Derek knew she was right. But what choice did they have? They'd spent everything on the house, their entire savings, retirement funds, everything. They couldn't afford to walk away. But they couldn't afford to stay either. The psychological breakdown. By August, the Broadduses were unraveling. Sleep became impossible. Every sound in the rental house made them jump. Every car that drove past, every shadow in the window. Maria started having nightmares. In them, the children were playing in the basement of 657 Boulevard. She called to them, but they couldn't hear her. And then she'd see a figure in the darkness. Watching, waiting, reaching for them, she'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, unable to breathe. Derek couldn't close his eyes without seeing the letters. The handwriting, the words. Young blood. Draw them to me. I will be watching. They began seeing a therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist specializing in trauma. She diagnosed them both with acute stress disorder bordering on PTSD. What you're experiencing is a normal response to an abnormal situation, Dr. Chen explained. You're living in a state of hypervigilance. Your brains are stuck in fight or flight mode. You're not sleeping, not processing, not healing. She prescribed anti-anxiety medication for Maria. Sleep aids for Derek. She recommended they limit their exposure to the house, to news coverage, to anything that triggered the trauma. But how could they limit exposure when their entire lives revolved around it? Every penny they had was tied up in a house they couldn't live in. Every day brought new legal bills, therapy bills, investigation costs. Derek's work performance suffered dramatically. He was a senior executive at an insurance company, a job that required focus, decision-making, leadership. But he couldn't concentrate. Couldn't think. Missed meetings, forgot deadlines. His boss called him in for a conversation. Derek, I know you're dealing with something difficult, but I need you here, present. If you can't do the job, we need to talk about your future with the company. The threat of losing his job terrified Derek almost as much as the Watcher. If he lost his income, they'd lose everything. The house, their savings, everything. Maria stopped leaving the rental house entirely. Groceries were delivered, errands were left undone. She couldn't face the outside world. The first panic attack had hit her in the grocery store. A stranger had smiled at her children, asked their ages. A normal interaction, a kind gesture. But Maria's hands went numb. Her vision tunneled. Her chest tightened until she couldn't breathe. She abandoned the cart and fled to the parking lot, pulling her children with her, certain the stranger was the Watcher, certain they'd been followed. The children cried, confused and scared by their mother's behavior. After that, Maria couldn't go out. The thought of being in public, of strangers seeing her children, knowing their names, their faces, it was unbearable. She started researching homeschooling, If they couldn't leave, if the watcher was watching, maybe the children shouldn't go to school, shouldn't be exposed, shouldn't be vulnerable. Derek tried to reason with her. Maria, we can't let this person control our lives. The kids need normalcy. They need school, friends, activities. They need to be safe, Maria shouted back. That person knows their names, Derek. They know what they look like. They've been watching them. What if they follow them to school? What if they're waiting for them? The arguments became frequent, heated. Both of them were operating on no sleep, maximum stress, and constant fear. Their marriage began to fracture under the weight of it. Derek became obsessive about the investigation. He installed more cameras around 657 Boulevard. High definition, night vision, motion activated. He reviewed footage for hours every night. A car driving slowly past the house at 2 a.m. Was that the watcher? Or just someone lost? A figure walking a dog at dusk, pausing to look at the house. Innocent or surveillance? A neighbor checking their mail, glancing towards 657 Boulevard. Normal behavior or suspicious? Derek couldn't tell anymore. Everyone was a suspect. Everything was a clue. He started keeping a detailed journal. Every person who walked past the house, every vehicle that parked nearby, license plates, clothing descriptions, physical characteristics, times and dates. Pages and pages of observations that led nowhere. He created a suspect board in the rental house's spare bedroom. Photos of neighbors, maps of Boulevard, timelines, theories written in frantic handwriting, lines connecting names and dates and possible motives. Maria walked in one night and stared at the board in horror. Derek, this is not healthy. You're becoming obsessed. I'm trying to find answers, Derek shouted. The police aren't doing enough. Someone on that street knows something. Someone is the watcher, and I'm going to figure out who. But the obsession was consuming him. He wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating properly. His weight dropped. Dark circles formed under his eyes. He looked haunted. The children sensed something was wrong. The eldest, 10-year-old Emma, asked questions constantly. Daddy, when are we moving into the new house? You promised I could paint my room purple. Mommy, why are you sad all the time? Did we do something wrong? Are we still going to have the big backyard? You said we could get a dog. And Derek and Maria had no answers. How do you tell your children that the house they dreamed about is poisoned? That someone out there knows their names, knows their faces, knows which windows would be theirs? How do you explain that evil doesn't always look like a monster? Sometimes it looks like a mailbox, a piece of paper, words that crawl inside your mind and never leave. Emma started having nightmares too. She'd wake up crying, saying someone was watching her through her window. There was no one there, but she couldn't be convinced. The middle child, 8-year-old Noah, became withdrawn, quiet. He stopped playing with friends, stopped talking about school. The youngest, 5-year-old Lily, began wetting the bed again, a regression to behaviors she'd outgrown years ago. Dr. Chen recommended family therapy. The children needed help processing their parents' trauma, even if they didn't fully understand it. But therapy cost money. Money the Broadduses didn't have. By late summer, Maria stopped answering the phone entirely, stopped checking email. The story had leaked to local news, then national outlets. The media descended on Westfield. Reporters called constantly, knocked on doors, tried to interview neighbors. Watcher House became a headline, a story. a mystery that captivated true crime enthusiasts nationwide. Strangers sent messages to the Broad Deuces, some sympathetic, offering prayers and support, others cruel, accusing them of faking the letters to get out of the sale. Others still were conspiracy theorists, claiming the watcher was a ghost, a demon, a government experiment. Anonymous emails arrived with theories, accusations, mockery. One read, "Maybe you're the crazy ones. Maybe you should have stayed where you belong." Another, "Your children are beautiful. I've seen their photos online. The watcher chose well." That one made Maria vomit. Someone was looking at her children's photos, studying them. The thought made her skin crawl. She deleted all social media, removed any trace of her family online. But the damage was done. Their photos, their names, their story. It was all out there. Permanent. Searchable. The watcher had made them famous, and in doing so, had exposed them to countless other watchers. Derek drove past 657 Boulevard every morning on his way to work. Every evening on the way home. Sometimes he'd circle the block twice, 3 times, searching for anything out of place. A car that shouldn't be there. A face in a window. A shadow moving where no shadow should move. At odd hours, he'd park down the block, engine off, lights off, and just sit, watching, waiting for someone to slip up, to reveal themselves. One night, he sat there for 4 hours, until 2 a.m., watching an empty street, watching his empty house. A police cruiser pulled up beside him. Officer Ramirez, who'd been assigned to patrol Boulevard regularly. "Mr. Broaddus, you need to go home. You can't keep doing this to yourself." "Someone's out there," Derek insisted. "Someone's watching. I just need to catch them. We're watching too. We have patrols. We have your cameras. You need to rest. You need to take care of your family." But Derek couldn't rest, because the truth was, they would never live at 657 Boulevard. The watcher had already won. Fall 2014. The house sat empty, watching itself. The Broadduses rented a smaller home nearby, close enough to monitor 657 Boulevard, far enough to feel some semblance of safety. But safety was an illusion. They checked the cameras obsessively. The footage streamed to their phones, to their laptops. Motion alerts pinged throughout the day and night. A squirrel on the lawn, leaves blowing across the driveway. The mailman. The mailman. The mailman. Was it him? Could it be him? He had access. He walked past the house every day. He touched their mailbox. Derek researched the mailman, found his name, his address, his social media, looked for anything suspicious, found nothing. The man had been a postal worker for 15 years, clean record, family man. But Derek couldn't let it go. Anyone with access was a suspect. They watched the street, watched the neighbors. Maria began recognizing patterns that weren't there. A neighbor who left for work at the same time each day suddenly became suspicious. Why so predictable? Why so routine? Another neighbor who waved too enthusiastically became suspect. Why so friendly? What were they hiding? The elderly woman across the street, Peggy Rice. She was always in her window, always watching. Was she the watcher? Or was she watching for the watcher too? Derek wanted to confront her, march across the street and demand answers. Detective Lugo talked him down. "Mr. Broaddus, you cannot take matters into your own hands. If you harass neighbors, you'll be the one facing charges. Let us handle the investigation." But the investigation was going nowhere. Months had passed. No arrests, no real suspects. Just theories and dead ends. And every time they searched, every time they watched, every time they reviewed the footage, nothing. No one suspicious, no one lurking. Just Boulevard. Quiet. Normal. Waiting. The neighborhood went on living. Children played, dogs barked, lawn mowers hummed on Saturday mornings. Life continued as if nothing had changed. But for the Broad Deuces, everything had changed. They'd become prisoners of their own paranoia. Trapped between a house they owned but couldn't enter, and a mystery that consumed them but offered no answers. And somewhere, in the space between the watching and the waiting, the watcher remained. Patient, invisible, victorious. The investigation intensifies. Detective Lugo wasn't ready to give up. Even as the case grew cold, even as leads evaporated, he remained committed. He brought in additional resources. The Union County Prosecutor's Office assigned 2 investigators full-time to the case. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit provided a detailed profile of the watcher. According to the FBI's profile, the watcher was likely a white male, aged 40 to 65, living within walking distance of 657 Boulevard. He was intelligent, possibly college-educated, with knowledge of the house's history and the neighborhood's dynamics. He was likely socially isolated, with few close relationships. His obsession with the house suggested he had significant time to devote to watching, suggesting unemployment, retirement, or a flexible work schedule. He exhibited narcissistic personality traits, a need for control, a desire to be acknowledged, an inflated sense of importance regarding the house. He was risk-averse. The careful avoidance of forensic evidence suggested he was knowledgeable about police procedures, possibly through media consumption or personal experience. The profile suggested the watcher was not physically dangerous in a traditional sense, but posed a significant psychological threat. His goal was power and control through fear, not physical violence. However, the profile also warned, if the watcher felt ignored or dismissed, he might escalate to maintain relevance. Armed with this profile, Detective Lugo narrowed his suspect list. Michael Langford fit many of the criteria. Male, early 60s, lived next to 657 Boulevard. Retired teacher, reclusive, refused to cooperate with police. When questioned, Langford became defensive. I don't have to answer your questions without a lawyer. I know my rights. His refusal to cooperate made him the prime suspect in many people's minds. But refusal to cooperate isn't evidence of guilt. Lugo obtained a warrant for Langford's property. A search revealed nothing. No letters, no evidence connecting him to the watcher. Just an old man who valued his privacy and resented police intrusion. Peggy Rice remained a person of interest. She admitted to watching Boulevard constantly. She knew everyone's comings and goings. She'd lived there for 40 years. When questioned more aggressively, she became indignant. I watch because I care. This used to be a respectable neighborhood. Now we have people who don't belong here. What do you mean, don't belong? Detective Lugo asked. I mean, people who don't understand Boulevard's history, its standards. You can't just buy your way in and expect to be welcome. There it was. Resentment toward the Broaduses. But resentment isn't a crime. And there was no evidence connecting Rice to the letters. The police investigated the Woods family more thoroughly. Had they been involved? Had they sent the letters to sabotage the sale? To keep the house? But that theory didn't hold. They'd already sold the house. They'd moved away. They'd gotten their money. What motive would they have? Still, Detective Lugo pressed them. You received a letter and didn't disclose it. Why? Andrea Woods became tearful. We didn't think it was serious. We thought it was just some eccentric neighbor saying goodbye. We'd lived there 23 years without any problems. How were we supposed to know? John Woods added, if we'd known this would happen, we never would have sold to them. We would have done something. But we didn't know. The detectives believed them. The Woods seemed genuinely shocked by the escalation. Police expanded their search to former residents of 657 Boulevard. Perhaps someone with a previous connection to the house had become obsessed. They tracked down families going back to the 1960s, interviewed elderly former residents, checked death records for descendants who might have inherited the obsession. One former resident, now in her 80s, remembered something strange. There was a boy who used to stand across the street and stare at the house. This was back in the 70s. He'd just stand there for hours. My husband finally went out and asked him what he was doing. The boy said he was watching the house, said it was his job. Detective Lugo's pulse quickened. Do you remember his name? No, I'm sorry. It was so long ago. He was maybe 13, 14 years old. Dark hair, quiet. After my husband confronted him, we never saw him again. If that boy was 14 in 1975, he'd be in his 50s now. The right age for the watcher. But without a name, it was another dead end. Police checked school records from Westfield schools in the 1970s. Thousands of students had attended. Without more information, it was impossible to identify the boy. They investigated online communities obsessed with the case. Reddit threads, true crime forums, local Facebook groups. Had someone online become too involved? Inserted themselves into the story? They found plenty of armchair detectives, conspiracy theorists, and curious onlookers. But no smoking gun. Forensic analysis of the letters continued. Experts studied the paper under microscopes, looking for fiber evidence, pollen, anything that might indicate where the letters were written. They found microscopic wood fibers consistent with an older home, but that described half of Westfield. They analyzed the ink. Standard ballpoint pen. Blue. Available at any store. They looked for indentations on the paper, signs of previous writing that might have transferred. Nothing. Whoever wrote these letters had been extraordinarily careful. The FBI suggested a strategy. Publicize the case widely. Often, stalkers want attention. They want to be acknowledged. If the watcher felt the investigation was losing momentum, he might send another letter to reignite interest. But Detective Lugo worried about that approach. What if publicity brought copycats? What if it endangered the Broaddus family further? In the end, the story leaked anyway. Media coverage exploded. The Watcher house became national news, and the Watcher went silent. No more letters, no more contact, as if the attention had driven them underground. Or perhaps, as the FBI suggested, the Watcher had achieved their goal. The Broadduses weren't living in the house. The house was empty. In the Watcher's mind, they'd won. The letters had stopped. But that was almost worse. Silence can be louder than threats. Because now, the Watcher wasn't just in the letters. The Watcher was in their heads. The community turned on them. Neighbors began to resent the attention, the police presence, the rumors. Some accused the Broadduses of faking the letters to get out of the sale. Others whispered that they were overreacting, paranoid, Disturbed, no one wanted to believe the watcher was real. Because if the watcher was real, then they weren't safe either. Local online forums became vicious. Anonymous posters claimed the broad deuces were lying, that they'd written the letters themselves for attention, for insurance fraud, to escape a bad investment. "They're destroying our property values," one neighbor wrote. "This whole story is making Westfield look bad. I don't believe any of it." Another wrote, "If they didn't want the house, they shouldn't have bought it. Quit whining and move in or sell it." The hostility was crushing. The Broadduses had expected sympathy, support. Instead, they were treated like pariahs. Derek and Maria hired private investigators, consulted forensic experts, spent thousands they didn't have chasing shadows. One private investigator, a former FBI agent named Robert Hayes, spent weeks on the case. He interviewed neighbors the police had already talked to, looking for inconsistencies, for things they might have held back. He discovered that several neighbors had received strange letters over the years. Nothing as threatening as the watcher's letters, but odd nonetheless. Anonymous notes commenting on their landscaping, their visitors, their habits. One neighbor admitted she'd received a letter 10 years prior telling her she should maintain the standards of Boulevard after she'd painted her shutters a different color. Another had received a note criticizing his Christmas decorations as garish and inappropriate for a neighborhood of this caliber. Were these connected to the watcher? Or just the rantings of a different busybody? Hayes believed they were connected. You have someone in this neighborhood who believes they're the guardian of Boulevard, who monitors everyone, who feels entitled to judge, to comment, to control. The watcher letters are an escalation of a pattern that's been going on for years. But even with this theory, Hayes couldn't identify the culprit. He set up his own surveillance, watching the street at different hours, documenting movement patterns, looking for anyone who seemed overly interested in 657 Boulevard. He noticed Michael Langford walked his property line daily, always glancing toward the Broaddus house. Was that significant? Or just a man walking his property? He noticed Peggy Rice kept detailed notes in a journal while watching from her window. What was she writing? Innocent observations? Or something more sinister? He documented a man who jogged past the house every morning at precisely 6:15 a.m. The same man. The same time. For weeks. Hayes tried to approach him, but the jogger avoided contact, changing his route after Hayes made himself visible. Was the jogger the watcher? Or just someone who didn't want to be bothered by an investigator? Without concrete evidence, everything remained speculation. Another theory suggested the watcher might be someone with a developmental disorder, intelligent but socially isolated, obsessed with routine and territory. Hayes consulted with a psychiatrist who specialized in obsessive disorders. What you're describing sounds like someone with obsessive-compulsive tendencies combined with narcissistic traits, the psychiatrist explained. They've created a delusional system where they believe they're the rightful guardian of this house. In their mind, the house belongs to them, even though legally it doesn't. Any challenge to that belief system triggers their need to reassert control. This matched the FBI profile. But again, a profile wasn't a name. Hayes's investigation, like the police investigation, eventually stalled. After burning through $15,000, Derek and Maria had to let him go. They couldn't afford to continue. By winter, Maria stopped leaving her rental home. The thought of Boulevard, even driving near it, triggered panic. She'd lost 20 pounds. Her hair started falling out from stress. She was on multiple medications for anxiety, depression, sleep disorders. Dr. Chen urged her to consider inpatient treatment. Maria, You're experiencing a complete breakdown. Your body is shutting down. You need intensive care. But Maria refused. I can't leave my children. What if something happens while I'm gone? What if the Watcher finds them? Her paranoia had reached delusional levels. She believed the Watcher was everywhere, that anyone could be the Watcher, that leaving her children, even for a moment, could be fatal. Derek became withdrawn, angry, obsessed with finding the Watcher. He spent hours on true crime forums, posting about the case, reading theories, arguing with skeptics who claimed the letters were fake. He created multiple online personas, pretending to be different people, trying to bait the Watcher into revealing themselves. I know who you are, he'd post. I know what you did. You're going to get caught. But the Watcher never responded, never engaged. If they were following the case online, they remained silent. Their marriage strained under the constant pressure. Arguments became daily, sometimes multiple times a day. You're not even here anymore, Maria screamed one night. You're obsessed with that house, with finding this person, and you've forgotten about us. About your family. We're falling apart, and you don't even see it. I'm trying to protect us, Derek shouted back. I'm trying to find answers. What do you want me to do? Just give up? Let this person win? They've already won. Maria collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. Don't you see? They've already destroyed us. The house is worthless. Our savings are gone. Our children are traumatized. Our marriage is dying. They won, Derek. They won the moment we opened that first letter. Derek had no response, because she was right. Their children were suffering too. Emma, now 11, had become anxious and withdrawn. She'd started seeing the school counselor for panic attacks. She couldn't concentrate in class. Her grades dropped. Noah, 9 years old, had become aggressive, fighting at school, lashing out at teachers. The school called Derek and Maria in for a conference. Your son is exhibiting signs of severe stress, the counselor explained. He's angry, volatile, and he's told us he feels unsafe. We're concerned about his well-being. When they asked Noah what was wrong, he finally broke down. I'm scared all the time. I'm scared of the Watcher. I'm scared they're going to hurt us. I'm scared Mom and Dad are going to get divorced. I'm scared we're going to lose everything. 9 years old, and carrying that weight. Lily, the youngest, had regressed significantly. Bedwetting, nightmares. She wouldn't sleep alone. She clung to Maria constantly, crying if her mother left the room. She's experiencing separation anxiety, Dr. Chen explained. She's picked up on your fear, your trauma, and internalized it. To her, the world is dangerous and unpredictable. She needs stability, routine, safety. And right now, she doesn't have that. The family was disintegrating, and the Watcher's silence made it worse. Because without new letters, without new evidence, the investigation had nowhere to go. And 657 Boulevard? It sat dark, empty. The dream home had become a tomb. Paint cans still sat in the kitchen from the renovations that never finished. Drop cloths covered floors. The nursery that was supposed to be Lily's room remained unpainted, unfurnished, unlived in. Neighbors complained about the eyesore, about the property being neglected, about their own home values declining because of the empty house and the notoriety. The Westfield Town Council received petitions demanding the Broaddeuces either occupy the property or sell it. Some neighbors threatened to sue for damages to their property values. The pressure mounted from all sides. In December 2014, the Broaddeuces made a decision. They would never live in the house. They would try to sell it, and they would do everything they could to move on. But moving on wasn't an option the Watcher would allow. The house went on the market. The Broadduses disclosed everything. The letters, the stalking, the investigation. Legally, they had to. Real estate law requires disclosure of material defects. And a stalker obsessed with your children? That's about as material as it gets. And predictably, no one wanted it. The first potential buyers toured the house with morbid curiosity. A young couple from Manhattan looking for a suburban home for their growing family. They walked through nervously, imagining someone watching them. When they reached the basement, the wife froze. I can't do this. I keep thinking about those letters, about someone wanting children down here. I can't. They left without making an offer. Potential buyers toured once, then vanished. Offers fell through. Curiosity seekers and true crime fans showed up, gawking, taking photos. One couple arrived with cameras, filming everything. We run a paranormal investigation YouTube channel, they explained. We want to see if the house is haunted. Derek threw them out. News vans parked on the street. Reporters knocked on neighbors' doors. The story had taken on a life of its own. 657 Boulevard became infamous. A ghost story on a living street. True crime podcasts dedicated episodes to The Watcher. Amateur sleuths on Reddit created sprawling threads with theories, suspect lists, and wild speculation. Some claimed the Watcher was a time traveler. Others said it was a demon. One elaborate theory suggested the house was built on a Native American burial ground, and the Watcher was a vengeful spirit. The serious theories got lost in the noise. And the Watcher? Still silent, still watching. The Broadduses sued the previous owners, the Woods family, for failing to disclose the first letter. The case dragged on for years. It became a legal nightmare on top of a psychological one. Depositions, court dates, lawyers draining what little money they had left. The lawsuit claimed fraud and failure to disclose a material defect. The Broadduses argued that if they'd known about the letter, they never would have purchased the house. Their lawyer presented evidence of the psychological damage, the financial losses, the complete destruction of their lives. Medical records showing Maria's breakdown, therapy bills, lost wages, the mounting mortgage debt. The Woods family defended themselves. They insisted the single letter they'd received days before closing seemed like a harmless prank. Nothing threatening. Nothing that warranted alarm. Just odd. We lived in that house for 23 years. John Woods testified. Our children grew up there. We never had a single problem. One weird letter didn't change that. But you knew it was unusual enough to remember it, the Broaddus attorney challenged. Unusual enough that when Mr. Broaddus called you, you immediately knew what he was talking about. Yes, but we didn't think it was dangerous. We thought it was just, Westfield has some eccentric people. We thought it was one of them. The Woods attorney argued that his clients had no duty to disclose a single anomalous letter with no history of threats or danger. That they couldn't have foreseen the escalation. That they were victims of the Watcher too. But the Broadduses knew better. They'd received multiple letters, each one more disturbing than the last, each one proving this wasn't a prank. This was a pattern, an obsession, and the Woods had opened the door to it, then walked away. The case became public. News outlets covered the trial. Court TV filmed proceedings. Legal experts debated it on cable news. The Broaddus family's private hell was now entertainment for millions of strangers. Derek had to testify about the letters, about his family's suffering, about his mental state. He broke down on the stand, describing how his daughter had panic attacks, how his son had become violent, how his youngest couldn't sleep. "This person destroyed my family," Derek said, voice shaking. And the Woods knew something was wrong. They knew, and they said nothing. Maria's testimony was worse. She could barely speak through tears, describing her panic attacks, her fear, her inability to function. "I can't be a mother anymore," she sobbed. "I can't protect my children. I can't give them a normal life. Everything is fear. Every moment, every day. And it started with that first letter. The letter the Woods knew about." The jury looked sympathetic. But sympathy doesn't always translate to a verdict. In the end, the Woods admitted they'd received the letter, but claimed they didn't think it was serious. The courts ruled in favor of the Woods. The judge determined that a single bizarre letter, with no history of threats or danger, did not constitute a material defect that required disclosure, that the Woods had no way of knowing the situation would escalate, that they bore no legal responsibility for the watcher's actions. The broad deuces lost. The courtroom erupted. Derek shouted at the judge. Maria collapsed. Their lawyer immediately filed an appeal, but the damage was done. They'd spent years fighting, years hoping for some form of justice, some acknowledgement that they'd been wronged. And they got nothing. By 2016, they were financially ruined, emotionally destroyed, legally defeated. The legal fees alone had cost them over $70,000. The mortgage on 657 Boulevard still had to be paid every month. $13,000 every month for a house they couldn't live in and couldn't sell. They were paying for two homes, the one they couldn't live in and the rental they were trapped in. Derek's salary, once comfortable, was barely covering their expenses. They'd drained their savings, emptied their retirement accounts, borrowed from family members who were growing impatient for repayment. Credit card debt mounted, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000. They were drowning. Derek's work suffered catastrophically. His performance reviews went from excellent to unsatisfactory. He was passed over for a promotion he'd been promised. His boss suggested tactfully that perhaps he needed to sort out his personal situation before returning to full capacity. The implication was clear. Fix this or lose your job. But how do you fix a nightmare with no ending? Maria couldn't function at all. She'd been a part-time graphic designer before this began. Now she couldn't work, couldn't focus, couldn't meet deadlines or communicate with clients. Her income had disappeared entirely. Their children were suffering in ways that would take years to heal, if they ever healed at all. Friends distanced themselves. Family members grew weary of the story. Some suggested they just move on, just sell at a loss and walk away. As if it were that simple. As if you could sell a house no one wanted. As if you could walk away from $1 million debt. As if you could just forget that someone had stalked your children, invaded your life, destroyed your family, and gotten away with it. In desperation, they made a decision. They would rent out 657 Boulevard. Let someone else live there. Maybe, if tenants stayed without incident, it would prove the house was safe. Maybe it would help them sell. The thought made Maria physically ill. We're putting other people in danger. What if the watcher goes after them? What if something happens to their children? We don't have a choice, Derek said flatly. We're going to lose everything if we don't do something. They rented out the house to tenants who reported nothing unusual. No letters, no threats. Just a house. The tenants were a family with 2 children. The wife was a teacher. The husband worked in finance. They'd been told about the watcher, about the letters, but they didn't seem concerned. "We think it was just someone trying to scare you off," the husband said. "We don't believe in that stuff." They moved in August 2016, and nothing happened. The tenants lived there for months, then a year. They raised their children in those bedrooms. The children played in that basement. They checked that mailbox every day, and nothing happened. No letters, no watcher, no terror. It was as if the watcher had only ever wanted them. That realization was somehow worse than the letters themselves, because it meant this wasn't random. This wasn't about the house. This was personal, targeted, calculated. Someone had chosen the Broaddus family specifically, had waited for them, had wanted them to suffer. Someone had studied them, learned about them, and decided they were the perfect victims. But why? That question haunted them more than any letter ever could. The tenants reported one odd thing. Just one. After they'd been living in the house for about 6 months, they mentioned to Derek that they'd noticed someone standing across the street sometimes, late at night, just standing there, looking at the house. "Did you call the police?" Derek demanded. "No, it's a public street. People can stand wherever they want." It was just weird, like they were staring specifically at the house. What did they look like? I couldn't really see. It was dark. Average height, maybe? I don't know. By the time I thought to get a better look, they were gone. Derek immediately contacted Detective Lugo, who was still technically assigned to the case, though it had long gone cold. Lugo increased patrols around Boulevard. Officers watched the street at night. But they never saw anyone suspicious. Was someone still watching? Or had the tenant imagined it, influenced by knowing the house's history? There was no way to know. Why the Broaddusses? Why that family? Why those children? No one knows. Derek developed his own theories, obsessively researched, written in notebooks he kept hidden from Maria. Theory 1. Someone on Boulevard had been close to the Woods family. When the house sold, they felt betrayed, abandoned. They wanted revenge against whoever took the house from the Woods. But that didn't explain the generational watching claim, the references to the 1920s and 1960s. Theory 2. Someone had once lived in the house, or their family had. They felt entitled to it. When it sold to the Broaddusses, they snapped. But police had checked all former owners. None matched the profile. Theory 3. Someone with a mental illness had fixated on the house for reasons only they understood. The Broaddusses were simply unlucky enough to trigger their delusion. This was the theory Derek believed most, because it meant it wasn't personal. It was just random, cruel fate. But deep down, he suspected it was personal. The watcher knew too much, cared too much. This wasn't random fixation. This was targeted malice. In 2019, the Broaddusses finally sold the house. At a loss, hundreds of thousands of dollars gone. They sold it for $959,000, nearly $400,000 less than they'd paid. After realtor fees, after paying off the mortgage, they walked away with nothing. 5 years of mortgage payments, 5 years of legal fees, 5 years of therapy, medication, private investigators, 5 years of hell. And they got nothing. The new owners were told everything. They'd read the news articles, listened to the podcasts, knew the whole story. They moved in anyway. A couple in their 40s, no children. just them and their dog. "We think it's a beautiful house with an unfortunate history," the new owner told reporters. "But we're not afraid. We don't have young children. We don't fit the watcher's profile. We think we'll be fine." And the watcher? Nothing. Not a word. The new owners lived there for months, then years, without incident. They installed security cameras, motion detectors, high fences. But they reported no letters, no threats, no watching presence. It was as if the watcher had simply vanished, satisfied, their work complete. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The case remains unsolved. No arrests, no charges, no confession. The Westfield police investigated over 100 leads, interviewed dozens of neighbors, analyzed the letters with FBI resources. They brought in forensic linguists to study the writing patterns. Experts suggested the watcher was likely highly educated, possibly with a background in literature or history. The language was deliberate, archaic in places, theatrical. The use of phrases like young blood and second coming suggested someone familiar with Gothic literature, horror tropes, religious imagery. The repetition of "I watch and wait" indicated someone who enjoyed the power of anticipation, of prolonged psychological manipulation. One linguist noted, "This person is performing. They're creating a character, a persona. The watcher isn't just stalking this family, they're crafting a narrative. They see themselves as the villain in a horror story, and they're relishing it." They tested the paper under electron microscopes, standard printer paper, available at any office supply store, no watermarks, no distinguishing features. The envelopes, generic, self-seal adhesive, not lick seal, which meant no DNA from saliva. Purchased at any drugstore or supermarket. They analyzed the postmarks, all mailed locally, within Westfield or nearby towns like Cranford, Garwood, Mountainside. But the post office processed thousands of letters daily. No surveillance cameras captured the sender. They checked for security footage from nearby businesses, hoping someone might have been captured mailing the letters. Hours of footage reviewed, hundreds of people mailing letters. No way to identify which one was the watcher. No fingerprints on the paper or envelope. Whoever sent these letters had worn gloves or been extraordinarily careful not to leave biological evidence. They looked into every neighbor on Boulevard. Background checks, financial records, criminal histories, mental health records were legally accessible, social media activity. Some neighbors had eccentricities. Some had grudges, minor disputes over property lines, noise complaints, parking spaces, but nothing that suggested this level of obsession. Michael Langford, the reclusive neighbor, refused to cooperate fully with police. That made him the prime suspect in the public's eye. When police obtained a search warrant for his property, they found nothing. No letters, no drafts, no evidence connecting him to the watcher. They found a man who was private, yes. Socially awkward, perhaps, but not a stalker. "You people have harassed me for years," Langford told Detective Lugo during their final interview. "I'm guilty of being a private person. That's it. I didn't write those letters. I don't know who did. And I'm tired of being treated like a criminal because I don't want to chat with police whenever they knock on my door." He was right. And without evidence, the police had to let it go. Peggy Rice, the elderly woman who watched from her window, was questioned multiple times over the years. She admitted she watched the street constantly. She'd kept a journal for decades, noting comings and goings, changes to properties, new families moving in. "I'm the neighborhood historian," she explained. "I care about this place. I want to preserve its character." When asked about the Broad Deuces specifically, her tone changed. They didn't understand Boulevard. They came in and immediately started changing things, tearing out perfectly good landscaping, planning additions. They wanted to make it their house, not respect it as Boulevard's house. What does that mean, Boulevard's house? Detective Lugo asked. It means the house belongs here. It has a history, a character. You can't just bulldoze that for your personal preferences. It was a strange sentiment. Possessive? Controlling? But was it criminal? They analyzed her journals. Pages and pages of observations, some dated back 40 years. She noted when neighbors painted their houses, when they installed new mailboxes, when they had too many cars parked on the street, when children were too loud. It was obsessive documentation. But it wasn't the Watcher letters. Handwriting experts compared her writing to the Watchers. Different. Definitely different. Unless she disguised her handwriting. Which was possible. But without proof, it remained speculation. The police even considered the possibility of a former owner. Someone with a deep, irrational attachment to the house. They tracked down previous residents going back to the 1950s. Some were dead. Others had moved across the country. Some suffered from dementia and couldn't be reliably interviewed. None had any apparent connection to the letters. One former owner's daughter had an interesting recollection. "My father loved that house," she said. "When we sold it in the 80s, he cried. He said it felt like betraying family. He'd drive past it sometimes just to see it. But he died in 1998, so it couldn't have been him. But what if someone had inherited that obsession? A grandchild? A relative who felt the same irrational attachment?" Police investigated family trees, tracked down descendants of former owners, interviewed them. Nothing. Dead end after dead end. They investigated online forums, true crime communities, even local historical societies. Had someone become obsessed with the house's history? With Boulevard itself? They found plenty of people interested in the case, fascinated by the mystery, but no one who fit the profile of the Watcher, and found nothing. Every lead evaporated. Every theory collapsed under scrutiny. Every suspect had an alibi, or lacked evidence, or simply didn't fit. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit reviewed the case multiple times over the years. They profiled the Watcher as likely a local resident with narcissistic tendencies, a need for control, and a deep familiarity with the neighborhood. Possibly someone who felt entitled to the house. Someone who saw the Broad Deuces as invaders. Someone who believed they were the rightful guardian of 657 Boulevard. The profile suggested the Watcher was intelligent, organized, and patient. Someone capable of maintaining the obsession over years without acting impulsively. Someone who understood forensics well enough to avoid leaving evidence. Someone who knew when to stop before escalating to physical violence that would bring more intense police scrutiny. But a profile isn't a name, and without a name, there's no arrest. By 2017, the active investigation had stalled. The case went cold, not officially closed, but no longer actively pursued. The file sat in a drawer at the Westfield Police Department, thick with reports, interviews, forensic analyses, hundreds of hours of work, thousands of dollars spent, and no resolution. Detective Lugo retired in 2018. On his last day, he visited Derek Broaddus one final time. "I'm sorry," Lugo said simply. "I'm sorry we couldn't solve this for you. I'm sorry we couldn't get you justice." Derek just nodded. What was there to say? "Do you have a theory?" Derek asked. "After all these years, all that investigation, who do you think it was?" Lugo was quiet for a long moment. Then, I think it was someone close. On Boulevard or very near it. I think they're still there. Still watching. They stopped sending letters because they got what they wanted. The house is empty of the family they targeted. In their mind, they won. Will they ever be caught? Maybe. If they do it again. If they target another family. If they make a mistake. But honestly, I don't think they will. I think the Watcher committed the perfect crime. They terrorized you psychologically without ever crossing the line into prosecutable physical threats. They were careful enough to avoid forensic evidence. And they stopped before we could catch them. It was the truth Derek had known, but hadn't wanted to accept. The Watcher had committed the perfect crime. Not a physical crime, but a psychological one. They'd terrorized a family, destroyed their lives, and vanished without a trace. And somewhere, in Westfield or beyond, they remain. Free, anonymous, untouchable, watching. So who was the Watcher? Was it Michael Langford, the reclusive neighbor who refused to cooperate with police? Was it Peggy Rice, the elderly woman who watched Boulevard from her window for decades? Was it someone inside the Woods family, bitter about the sale, enacting revenge? Or was it something older, something generational? A tradition of obsession passed down, waiting for the right family to claim? Some believe the Watcher was never one person, that it was a collective, a group of neighbors, bored and cruel, who decided to torment a new family for sport. This theory gained traction online. Perhaps several neighbors worked together, writing the letters collaboratively, watching in shifts, protecting each other with alibis. It would explain why no single suspect ever had enough evidence, why the letters seemed to know so much. Multiple people were contributing information. But it seemed far-fetched. Could multiple people really maintain such a secret? For years, without anyone breaking? Others think it was someone from the house's past, a descendant of a former owner, fixated on lineage and legacy. The letters mentioned generations, grandfather in the 1920s, father in the 1960s. Now the writer's turn. Was that literal or metaphorical? Was there really a multi-generational obsession with 657 Boulevard? Or was the Watcher simply creating mythology to increase the fear? No one knows. And some believe the Watcher is still there. Living on Boulevard, watching the street, waiting. Perhaps for the next family with children, perhaps for the Broaddeuces to return, perhaps for nothing, simply content to watch. In 2022, the current owners of 657 Boulevard reported no incidents, no letters, no threats. But they also installed security cameras, motion detectors, high fences, just in case. They keep the curtains drawn at night. They don't publicize their children's names or schools. They eventually had a child, despite initial plans not to. They check the mailbox with gloves, carefully. Because once you know someone could be watching, you never stop looking over your shoulder. One of them admitted in a 2023 interview, "Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there. If they're watching us too, but just not writing. I wonder if they walk past the house and smile, knowing what they did to the previous family." It's unsettling. But we try not to think about it. But they do think about it. Everyone who knows the story thinks about it. So ask yourself, if someone was watching your home right now, would you know? If someone knew your children's names, their bedrooms, their routines, would you feel it? The Broaddeuces did, and it destroyed them. Derek and Maria eventually divorced in 2021. The strain of those years had broken something fundamental between them. They couldn't heal together. They could only remind each other of the trauma. Their children are teenagers now. In therapy, dealing with anxiety disorders, trust issues, fear of their own homes. Emma, the eldest, told a therapist, "I'll never feel safe in any house. Because I know now that someone can just decide to take that safety away. For no reason, and there's nothing you can do about it." Derek remarried, moved across the country, tries not to think about Boulevard, but he still has nightmares about the letters. Maria never fully recovered. She still struggles with agoraphobia, panic disorders. She lives with her sister now, in a small apartment. She sees her children regularly, but the relationship is strained. The Watcher took more than their money, more than their house. The Watcher took their family. 657 Boulevard stands quiet now. A beautiful home on a beautiful street. The current owners have renovated extensively. New kitchen, new bathrooms, fresh paint throughout. It looks nothing like it did when the Broad Deuces bought it. Maybe that's intentional. Maybe they're trying to erase the history. But history doesn't erase so easily. Tourists still drive by sometimes. True crime fans taking photos. YouTubers filming videos. "This is the Watcher house," they say to their cameras. The neighbors hate it. The notoriety, the attention. Some blame the Broad Deuces for making it a spectacle. But it was never the Broad Deuces who made it a spectacle. It was the Watcher. And somewhere, someone is watching. They always have been.